There we go. Okay, so the public galleries at the museum consist of an ethnography gallery, a hall of science and technology, and a natural history gallery. The ethnography gallery was laid out largely in the late 50s and 1960s by British and subsequently by Ugandan curators. The core exhibitions are set up in what in museum terms is called a sort of ethnographic framework. That is, objects are identified primarily as belonging to one or the other of Uganda's different ethnic groups. So here are, for example, the arrows that the museum displays as evidence of the armaments of ancestral culture. Here are other articles that are likewise labeled with different ethnic ethnonyms. The Uganda Museum hasn't, since its foundation, had a gallery of national history. And thus it's been quite hard for visitors to the museum, whether Ugandan or foreign, to get information about Uganda's colonial or post-colonial history. There are no permanent displays that engage with the history of Uganda in the 20th century, its political, cultural history per se. Instead, the ethnographic material predominates in the way the exhibitions are set up. Michigan started working, colleagues, including myself at Michigan, started working with the Uganda Museum in 2016 when we held a convocation at the museum to think through what the galleries might be redesigned to do. In 2019, there was a special exhibition that's kind of the antecedent to the one we've just opened. The Unseen Archive of Idi Amin, as we called it, was a photographic exhibition that was occasioned by the discovery of a whole trove of photographic material in the archives of the Uganda Broadcasting Corporation. The discovery of the photographic material and its subsequent digitization gave us material by which to lay on the exhibition in 2019-2020. That exhibition was very successful. It was covered widely in the international media. This is an article from The Guardian. Here's an article from the LA Times. The thing was covered also in extensively in the New Vision, the Monitor, and other Ugandan media. It was, as I said, a photographic exhibition drawn entirely in its content from the archives of the Uganda Broadcasting Corporation. And myself and the other curators, we did as much as we could with it. But all of us involved felt that there was more to do. The official photographic archive of the UBC gives insights into some aspects of Uganda's past, but not others. The official photography reflects the preoccupations and propagandistic self-interest of Uganda's rulers. It's hard to see in the UBC photos arenas of life that stood outside the lens of the government photographers. If the government photographer wasn't there, it doesn't show up in the archive. So in part out of that sense of dissatisfaction with the 2019-2020 show, and in part also out of demands from Uganda's public for more access to archival material and more information about Uganda's history, myself and colleagues at the museum opened up a discussion early in 2022 about an exhibition to mark the 60th anniversary of independence. We started working intensively on it in the middle part of this year. That is in May, largely in May and June. Those of you who work in museum circles will know that the timetable for such an exhibition was extremely compressed. We were slowed in part by the pandemic, which slowed everything down, and also by a kind of sense of unsurety about what the future of the museum's special exhibition hall was going to be. There was a plan to knock it down and build a new building on its site. And so until the situation there was clear, we didn't actually do any exhibition planning. When we got to May 2022, we started intensively collecting material that could attest to the kind of, what do you call it, the different arenas in which Ugandans made history in the 1960s. So we collected material outside the official photographic archive from a wide array of individuals and institutions, including, for example, private individuals like this man, Haji Kasirye, who gave us a couple of photographs of his father, Haji Busungu, as he was called, one of the rabble-rousers responsible for anti-Indian protests and boycotts in Kampala in 1959-1960. We worked also with British archives and media houses to locate and digitize official British photographs, including, for example, this picture of the opening of Uganda's parliament, 1962 October. And I was able also to open up conversations with private individuals in England who possessed photographs and material that we could use. Among them, this man, Tom Stacey, a journalist who was an active observer of politics in Western Uganda in the early 60s, and who gave us full access to his impressive photographic archive, with which we laid on a whole section of the exhibition, as I'll shortly show. We also worked with the Royal Commonwealth Society in Cambridge, which had, among other things, the papers of the Uganda Council of Women, including a lovely photographic exhibition, which the UCW had laid on in 1961, right before Ugandan independence, to showcase the achievements of Ugandan women. That exhibition was called Ugandan Women Look Ahead. We reproduced a substantial part of that photographic exhibition in our show, which opened earlier this year. We also, by the way, made contact with and worked closely with a Ugandan artist. His name is Ntareguma Mbahomwine, who's a Ugandan American who's digitized the negatives of a photo studio in Southwest Uganda, and who gave us 50 prints to work with, that is prints from the photo archive juxtaposed here, as you'll see, with pictures of contemporary Ugandans holding pictures that date from the early 60s. This was a much more disparate archive, in other words, collection of archives than the show we did in 2019, 2020. We were doing research, we were reaching out to collections, to archives, and to individuals to find material that could allow us to tell stories that stood outside the official domain, the official narrative, as it were, of the events of October 1962. The 2D parts of the exhibition were printed in Ann Arbor and brought to Kampala early in October, actually late in September, where we installed them in a real hurry. This is the opening stage of the exhibition going on the wall. Here's the part of the exhibition going up. And here's the one of the rooms of the exhibition being laid out by the carpenter. The exhibition, as we laid it out, was an effort to juxtapose the official account of Ugandan independence with the complexities and controversies that the official ceremonies, in some sense, rendered invisible. So the way the thing was laid out, you start, as you go through the exhibition, with photographs and archival material that attest to the public face of independence on the 9th of October, 1962. These are photographs largely from British archives and also from official archives in Uganda. We organized this wall deliberately with a kind of wall, as you'll see on the left part of this screen, of men who were present in the constitutional negotiations of 1961-62 and who were photographed serially by British photographers as an effort to demonstrate the inclusivity and representativity of the body that wrote Uganda's constitution. So these photographs, again, were made as a kind of evidence to show that every ethnic and regional group was present there in London when the constitution was written. Now, of course, as you'll notice, all the representatives shown here are men. So we, recognizing that this was itself a form of exclusion, used the photographs I mentioned earlier from 1961, the Uganda Council of Women exhibition, to contrast the gender specificity of the constitutional negotiations with elite women and their protest against that kind of closed-in politics. These are photographs that come from the 1961 UCW exhibition showing Ugandan women doing the work of building a modern Uganda. And they were deliberately put up in 1961 as a reproof against the, what do you call it, androcentrism of the constitutional and political class in those years. As you go inside the hall, the special exhibitions hall, we've tried to lay out the exhibition in a way that brings into view the sort of hidden controversies and disputatious, more localized politics that animated protest and discontent with Uganda's independence in 1962. So you could call everything that I'm about to show you a kind of hall of miscontents. These are people who found the events of 9th October to be incomplete, insufficient. So it starts with a part of the exhibition that's to do with the anti-Indian boycott of 1959-1960, which we represent largely through reproductions of Luganda language newspaper material, as shown here. This part of the exhibition largely focuses on Uganda's most populous and most prosperous region, that is the Buganda Kingdom, which in 1960 voted for a separate independence from the rest of Uganda. In this part of the exhibition, we try to unpack the logic that guided the separate independence vote and the political organizing that ensued to bring Buganda to a separate freedom, separate, that is, from the rest of Uganda. The second room inside the hall focuses on a parallel movement for a separate future in Western Uganda. Here, we use the archives of Tom Stacey, who I mentioned earlier, to represent the history of Uganda's enduring and most, controversial secessionist movement, launched by this man, Isaiah Mukinane, in 1962, to claim a future for a kingdom that he called Rwenzururu, that stood separate from the rest of Uganda. And so in this part of the exhibition, we've quite consciously put up pictures that represent what we see to be the heroism of the Rwenzururu movement and its protest against the autocratic and Kampala-centric politics of the first Uganda government, which came to power after October 1962. We also, in this part of the exhibition, have laid on, sort of to balance out this room, photographs from Eastern Uganda that likewise highlight discontent and protest in that part of the country in the early 1960s. Room 3 is to do with the Democratic Party, a Catholic-led party that challenged Milton Obote and his government's exclusive control over Uganda's public life. Here we worked closely with Benedicto Chiwanuka's family, particularly through the intermediation of John Earle, who's formerly a PhD student who worked with me, now a lecturer in Kentucky, and who's written an excellent book about Chiwanuka and his politics. Through John's work, we were able to make contact and work closely with the Chiwanuka family. And so here we reproduced photographs from his family album alongside the instruments of his public life, his wig, and his cane in particular, which helped to bring the man to life in some sense. There's his wig shown here. And also in this part of the room, there's photographs from the official government archives depicting the political career of Felix Onama, who was Milton Obote's right-hand man. When you go around the bend, there is a film which we laid on to feature cinematic footage from the early 60s, which we juxtaposed with interview material that David Ngendo Tshimba, Dr. Khanakwa, and I conducted with eminent Ugandans who remembered the events of those years. And then as you sort of process back toward the entrance to the hall, there's a kind of disparate collection of materials here, including a part of the exhibition that Edgar Taylor laid on, which is to do with the Ugandan left. And as you depart a room which brings into view the traumas of 1966, in particular, the occasion in May 1966 when Milton Obote's government assaulted the palace of the king of Buganda and forcibly brought an end to the Buganda kingdom, killing perhaps as many as 1,000 people in the process. We juxtapose pictures from this climactic event, May 66. We have pictures from Western Uganda, where the founder of Rwenzururu, coincidentally, died in September 1966, the same year as the Buganda kingdom was also brought to an end by force. So here's a few photographs that illuminate the onward course of Rwenzururi's political history. The exhibition was opened by His Excellency the President of Uganda on Wednesday, the 5th of October. It was the first occasion that a Uganda president has been inside the Uganda Museum since 1962 October, when Milton Obote was there. It was a lovely occasion. He spent maybe about 30 seconds inside the building, enough time to pick a fight with Pamela Khanakwa, but that was about it. We laid on a panel to sort of, what do you call it, to lend interest to the opening of the exhibition. So this panel featured eminent Ugandans who were present and involved in public life in the early 60s, including the former First Lady, Medea Obote. There was a large invitation-only audience, followed on the following day by a public discussion panel in which the children of eminent Ugandans from the early 60s discussed the achievements and foreclosures of their parents' generation. The opening of the exhibition was itself a major media occasion. I put some of the press coverage into an email that described this particular seminar for you, and here's a newspaper report. So that's my kind of spiel about the history and conception of the exhibition. I think let's now hear briefly from the curators who helped put it together. I listed Dr. Khanakwa first. Pamela, perhaps if you don't mind, you could start your video and give us a kind of reflection on what the exhibition did and didn't do.
Thank you very much, Derek. I'd first of all like to know if I'm loud and clear.
You are indeed.
Because okay, thank you. Because my connection is rather poor. So of course, thank you for walking us through the presentation. And this is very exciting and remains very exciting to us. So I think, speaking about what we could do and what we could not do, is that what you asked?
Yeah, why was it important to lay on this exhibition? These are the questions I put to you before. Why is it important to have the exhibition?
Right.
What could we do? What could we not do? Those kinds of issues.
Right,
really whatever you want to talk about. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, it is very important to have this exhibition, particularly at the National Museum, because 60 years of independence, I think that there's been no time when the museum or even the academics have participated in marking independence in the way that this exhibition was able to do. So just bringing or giving people the space and time to reflect on the history of the country 60 years down the road. And particularly for the Ugandan generation, or for some of our generation, actually, those that were not there at independence, to sort of have a conversation with people that experience independence, but also to see how some of these events were captured by the media, or reports in archives, and you have the actual primary source documents there. For me, that was very powerful. It was like a different way of looking at Uganda's history, a different way of also allowing people to see for themselves and interpret certain things, which is very different from when we just read the books, or even in schools, when school children or students are taught the way history is being taught in Uganda. So I thought that was really important to sort of to bridge that gap and get others, everybody. I would say everybody, because then the audience of the museum is not limited, to reflect on that. And then I think that, yes, we were able to do what we could get our hands on in terms of the sources, particularly the pictures, the newspaper reports, the archival sources and all that. And so we were able to try, and I'm saying try because I think we, as much as possible, wanted to make the exhibition sort of representative, and we were able to at least have on display material from different parts of the country. But of course, again, for a country like Uganda, it's difficult to have everybody feel that they are present in the exhibition. So there is that kind of feeling that, well, you're talking about an exhibition of the national history, but my district from my region present, they could only work with what was available. And then, of course, we're able to use also this exhibition to talk about so the different controversies, but some of the very contentious issues, and particularly the 1966 or the Renzururu, to kind of again put it there for people to see for themselves. I thought that was really great. The sort of limitation for me was our inability to sort of connect the present with the past, and not because we couldn't do it, but we had to be very careful about the politics and the risks of drawing some of the glaring present issues to the developments then back in time. So the politics around that, and then just learning that you have to be careful what you say in an exhibition, sort of different from perhaps what you would say if you're writing a paper for publication or something else, was a bit like constraining, but a good learning experience for me, that sometimes you don't have to say everything. You have to be careful. You have to be careful what you say. Yeah, and so I think we have the third question about what the positive reception given to the exhibition tells us about the changing place of history in Uganda. So I want to be excited that this tells us that the exhibition sort of gives us, first of all, that there's a changing place in the history of Uganda. I want to be excited about that, but I'm again very cautious a little bit, because I'm not sure if this place for history is really changing, especially given these sort of lashes that historians keep getting from the president. And maybe it's too early for us to celebrate. Of course, we had him there speak and seem to suggest that history is things of really the past. Why are you displaying this? Why are you talking about the 1950s and 1960s? Where is 1930s? And at that moment, when he seemed to really applaud archaeologists for what they were able to do about the distant past. And later on I was thinking, and I thought, okay, is this sort of taking us back to the Obote One days of trying to silence the more contemporary and seemingly contentious issues, and trying to get people to think about history as really the distant past. So I'm not sure until I hear him say more positive things about history. I'm still a little bit skeptical about that. But it is good that we had the exhibition, and it's good that it gave us the visibility. One cannot deny that, no matter what they say. It's like we've made the statement to them that historians are here, and this is what they do, and our history is this, and perhaps we need to think about this. I will submit that for now, Derek, so that I give a chance to someone else to speak. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Pamela. That was lovely. So Amon Mugume is the next one I think we had on the list. Amon is, as I mentioned earlier, curator for natural history, or natural science rather, at the Uganda Museum, and was the lead curator who worked with us from the museum side in this exhibition. Amon, can you unmute? Let me unmute there. I think you can unmute yourself.
Myself, I think that's okay. You get me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good evening and good morning. I think some areas, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, as Derek has already introduced me, I'm Amon Mugume, and I work with Uganda National Museum. And I think Derek already put clearly what most of the things that went through into when the exhibition was coming up. But majorly, I think it was also, the exhibition was also a learning process for many because there were a lot of do's and don'ts. And at the same time, it brings some of the information that the public has been asking for in the National Museum. The history, mostly, though it can't complete the whole historical part of Uganda, but it brings in the concept of the history of Uganda that the public has always been asking, most especially when it comes to the political side. So it bridges a gap that the museum has been missing, and I think it also reflects, because we've been having a lot of issues as the museum in terms of putting up the historical and political section because of different trends in the politics. But this also brings a way of how better can you turn the information that the current political system doesn't feel like it is there's something that you are either agitating the public or you're trying to put it down. So it's an exhibition that brings such kind of reflections, and also it's an exhibition that that brings a lot of learning. As Derek told you, most of the museum exhibitions we usually take, and by September end, or what they would call early October, it was already on. So these are some of the quickest, I think one of the quickest exhibition I've had also in terms of the temporary exhibition. It's one of the shortest and quickest exhibition I've had too, because we usually take time to go through the content and also bring out information that we know that it can be palatable for the public, because most of our audiences, apart from the adults who have kids, we always want to find that the information you are putting and the content and the gross of the text should be able to be conceptualized, should be able to be taken up by any age group and understood. But I think we managed to fight around that. And also, as Dr. Pamela has talked about it, the politics played also. We are playing a part in some of the sections of the museum, and as a team, we had a lot of don't do this, don't do with this text, let's edit it this way. So it was a learning section, a learning process, mostly on the political base of it, but also something that can also be reflected on in the future when other exhibitions are coming up, mostly on the national history and others, as we expand the museum and bring other sections online on board. It is something to be referenced and looked at. So the other thing is also the public is appreciating it. As a person on ground, mostly everyone who has come in has been interested, and actually their comments are very exciting. Most people are interested. Their people are seeing things for the first time. Others are just seeing these photos for the first time in their lives. Some people are finding their grandparents in some of these photos. Others are finding their close relatives and or village mates whose history they have heard, but they have never seen. So it is, I would say it's something that has come at the right time. And also, when it comes to the celebrations we've had about independence of Uganda for this year, it is one exhibition that that truly brings out the national history of Uganda as a whole. Though it is just having a certain period of time that it has captured in the 50s up to around 66, but it brings out a period of independence of Uganda compared to the other activities we've had around independence of Uganda this year. So it is a reflection for almost everyone, every Ugandan who has had a chance to see it, and those who will see it. I think for now, that's what I would submit. Possibly, if there would be a question and answer, then I can come in. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Taman. It's great to have your thoughts. And thank you for your work on this whole thing. Let's hear now from Dr. David Ngendo Tshimba, who's next on the list.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Derek, for leading this crew under very challenging circumstances, I must say. I think the show which we put out last month, actually for me, reminds me of Karl Marx insights. You know, Karl Marx is talking about history is made not the way we wish it, but with the material handed down to us. And I think we showcased also a history in this exhibition, not as we so wished in many ways, but with the materials and the limitation and the circumstances handed down onto us. And it's very important to remember that, because it is not to say that there is no such a thing as national history, but it is actually to say that thinking national history from a formerly colonized space is already an important challenge. And you could see very directly how uneven our exhibition is, much as it really ambitiously tried hard to be a national in scope. I want to say two quick things which can point to the kind of the circumventing limits we had to work with. One was how, for example, in a particular instance, we had to cut into two a small plague of a very small plague of a texture that had about 8 words, to cut it into two because it had the name of Mumbere, a 13-year-old boy. And for me, that speaks volume about how a 13-year-old Mumbere then is died, passing on, and we are trying very hard to limit the exhibition to 1966. And there is this photo which has gotten Mumbere in the middle of it, who today happens to be a king in the dock, a king under house arrest. It just couldn't fly. We had 3 days. The minister of tourism walked in the wall and made sure that everything is actually palatable to total consumption. So the final decision was really to cut down that small plague. I think it's a 3-inch tall plague, but we need to cut off so that the name of Mumbere could go off. And for me, it's a very anecdotal telling story of how the bricolage was the only thing which remained with, including improvising and making things work when almost possibilities of showcasing what we had in really mind and in store couldn't. So for me, that's one scenario, and I think both Pamela and Mugume have eloquently alluded to that as the politics of putting up a historical show. There's a second point which I want to reflect on, and the last one here is the presidential speech. The presidential speech on the day of the launch. As you know, many people who have listened to Museveni, it's a hell of a hard to follow guy who takes you in very vertigo-like sinuous roads. He has no speech, which is clear. He goes on off cathedra and so on and so on. So it's extremely hard to really listen to him. But he said something which actually caught my attention. In the middle of nowhere, he just dropped something like the aversion to really do. He said, why are you ethnographic in showcasing the past? Do you know the danger of being ethnographic? Like, this is Rezoruru, this is Wugisu, this is, I said, that should stop. And I was like, okay. He expressed to me a kind of, be careful how you go about the history, because history can be explosive. In a sense, also to give him some, to lend him some great deal of wisdom, we may say, he's actually telling us, be careful, the kind of things you're holding as history can be a time bomb. A few minutes into the speech, after having said that, after having expressed their aversion to a past which is for the most time collected in ethnographic terms, he goes on to say, but this Professor Peterson and his colleagues, where are the films of 1930s and 40s? We need the films which are not just for 50s and 60s. We need the films by those Wazungu of the 60s. Film footages is a most important piece of ethnographic research, and Museveni is dying of ethnographic pieces. At the same time, he's very averse to it. So the tension right at the heart of his speech about the utility of history and the risks of history caught my attention. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Those are both very fascinating anecdotes. Let's hear. Okay, so we've been joined by Nelson Abiti, who is the curator for ethnography. And I think you're now titled, you have the title Chief Curator. Is that right, Nelson? And also a PhD student in History and Heritage Studies at the University of Western Cape. Nelson, I think you can now unmute if you'd like to give us a few comments.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Pamela, David, Amon, and with the colleagues who are listening to us. I'm so glad people you made it, and some of the things you have already spoken. David, you spoke. One of the first statements I wanted to say was when the president talked about ethnographic separatedness. So I was looking at representing a nation in a museum is one of the complex things, how we try to do it. You will never represent a nation in a museum. You will attempt, but you'll always face the challenges because of the structures, especially the museum itself, its framework is ethnographic. And the exhibition itself, I was worried. I think when I saw the compartmentalization of Buganda, Karamoja, Bukedia, Rwenzururu, it was the same thing which we are trying to fight in the museum, coming into the museum in the name of the political history. So I was worried. And then, of course, we wanted something new, a place to sow. But I want to thank Derek for the work of archives. I think to us as a museum, we have benefited very, very much. These materials were hidden and we had not known where they were. And they have we have known now where they are, and they are good sources, and they are visible to the museum. So to me, that is a first item I appreciate. But definitely this exhibition was an ongoing discussions which we began from Idi Amin. And I remember meeting the family of Benedict Chiwanka. We were supposed to have that exhibition 2020, just a small micro about memory of Benedict Chiwanka on Independence Day, to see his role he played for the independence. But later on, COVID came and I think I lost track. Up to now, I didn't follow the exhibition. My thought was now to take this work which needed to clash with my work where I was coming. So I couldn't follow the content so well of the exhibition. But what I try to bring out is is the idea of us to think about the nation Uganda. I think we need to be kind of thinking about careful and not to go along the ethnic compartmentalization. We need to move somehow in a way that can lead us to reflect on a history that is inclusive, that will allow for a contemporary society to engage with, ask questions without labeling some of these ethnographic, which was the real kind of touching us and also pushing us to another corner. But I would want to say also a little bit of the audience making was somehow a little bit limiting to high class elite, and it excluded a lot of ordinary Ugandans in consuming this heritage of the past, what we call history. How do we make our very own street boys come to see the museum? So I remember asking that question. If I walk on the street and I tell them something in the museum, and these guys will ask me, what is there? What can I tell them? So that was the very question. I think from the conception up to the audience making, we did not think about young people and about ordinary citizens who are facing the reality of the histories of today. I think that is what I wanted to comment on. But to me, I'm one of those people who is trying to pretest what the museum can do and what it can't do. So you might have been pushed to a certain corner. I was one of the persons who began removing some of the things, but it was for good, and I didn't follow the others which happened after me. But I watched later on the YouTube what happened and the speeches. I've not seen the audience, but hopeful I will go before the museum closes, at least if I can monitor how visitors interact. Maybe the problem is normal when the exhibition takes after 1 month and then it starts cooling down. So that's the problem. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Nelson. You were, of course, really importantly involved in the whole conception of the exhibition earlier this year. So really glad to have your support. The last presenter is Dr. Edgar Taylor from the History Department, History and Heritage Studies at Makerere.
Thanks, Derek, and thank you to everyone. I'm going last, so I'm trying to find things to say, but I'll maybe just mention two elements here. One, I think it's important to separate the launch and the presence of the president and the fanfare around that from the exhibition itself, which goes on for a few months and allows for other kinds of interactions. So I'll say, just on the launch, I thought as a historian, what was interesting to hear the way the president framed it is when I forget who mentioned it, but he said, "Oh, what you young people call history, I call current affairs." Which there are many different ways, I think, to read that, both as a political statement and as a way of commenting on what history does in public life. But I think, it did signal that he's, and I think that history is part of public life as much as the NRM has invested or invested in disinvesting from certain kinds of history in the narrative it tells about itself. There was an acknowledgement there, very clear acknowledgement, that history is part of what he regards as current affairs and does things in the world. And that in some ways, I think, is and was it goes against maybe his things he said before of that history is the humanities are useless and so on. But I think it's interesting to see then, for me, transitioning to the exhibition itself, how it's been read and for me, it's been actually much more interesting, the responses, than the responses to the Idi Amin exhibition in 2019, because and I think part of it is specific to the way Uganda's history has been discussed over the last 60 years and told in public, where with Idi Amin, there's an awareness of what the debates will be about. Both one about the external view of Idi Amin. Ugandans are aware that Idi Amin is viewed in a kind of caricatured way abroad, that he has a reputation. But there's also a great deal of nostalgia for kind of economic nationalism that Idi Amin brought by many young people, and that sort of sets the terms for debate, whether he was the bad, evil things he did, whether there are things to be redeemed. And so the dynamics that we dealt with in that exhibition were about how to make visible violence that was not in the propaganda photos, how to to create a dialogue between what we knew was an existing debate in public life and what audiences could see in photos taken by Idi Amin's sort of propaganda press unit. This one's much because the sources that are in this exhibition, the current exhibition, are much more diverse. It's not a single source, and it's also there's not a single set of questions that I think people expect in a national history. I mean, the very fact that there is not a national history gallery in the museum, and that there's sort of an open question about what is national history. How would we tell a fully inclusive national history? I think makes the conversations around this material more interesting. And so I would say my biggest involvement, I have a slightly different perspective on it, because my biggest involvement in the material in the exhibition were in the two sections that were probably skipped over the most by audiences, that audiences found less interesting. So the first was a boycott campaign, a violent boycott campaign in the late 1950s against Indian businessmen. It was by commoners, ordinary people, in support, ostensibly in support of the king of Buganda and the kingdom establishment, but also really they weren't following orders from Ngendo. They were trying to support their own economic self-interest, and many of the people. So the photo that Derek showed earlier of Haji Kasile and his father, he feels that his father contributed tremendously to Uganda's decolonization, but has not received recognition of it publicly, really, except in this forum or in research that interested I think maybe just I'm the only person I think who's interviewed him as a historian. So in some ways that section, it doesn't cohere in the way that, say, Buganda's Declaration of Independence does, or the Lost Counties do. Those are things that people have active debates about. It's much more difficult to see how to how to make sense of something that did not have where the terms of debate have changed so drastically that what was this boycott about? How do you tell that story in just a few photos, and have it not be and have people realize what was at stake there? It set the terms, really, for, in my view, for how Uganda became independent. The second part that I was involved in, as Derek mentioned, was the Ugandan left, and many people ask, was there a Ugandan left? What was there was, it was a small, in the UPC, there was a leftist faction that saw its work as being very international. John Kakonge, also people who, interestingly, joined with the NRM later on. So in the video, there's an interview with Rundukive Jinja, who was himself a sort of part of that movement from Makerere. So what I wanted to show there, what I think we wanted to show was that this is not just a story about that's internal to Uganda. It's a story that Uganda's independence was part of a global anti-colonial movement, that Ugandans have always been contributing to global activism and debates around decolonization, anti-racism, labor mobilization, et cetera, et cetera. But it's one that made it, I found it very difficult to, I wasn't really that surprised, but many people skip by it because, I want to get to the part, the 1966 or, but I think it still was important to put there to show, there's some photos of, Milton Obote visiting Moscow, visiting China, their young leftists protesting. And even if they don't resonate, I think it's still significant that sort of forgotten elements of national history that are still on display. And then lastly, I just say that I've taken a few of my graduate students through the exhibition, and it's really to teach a class, the last thing is just in the exhibition, you'll see I tell them, you can tell there were a lot of historians involved because we have a lot of photos, but we also have a lot of text, photos of archival documents. And at least I don't know how others are reacting, but I think for us and our students, that's been a good thing. So yeah, that's really all I wanted to say, and thanks for all the contributions here. And
Okay, thank you, Edgar. I really fascinated by these 5 presentations and I'm delighted to have had a chance to talk through the exhibition with all of you. We've got a half an hour left in this seminar. In Kampala, we're heading to 11:30. So if any of our Kampala presenters need to go to bed, please feel free. It's very kind of you to stay up. I've now, I think, enabled you such that you can start your video and your sound if you'd like. And we have now time for questions and answer of any kind that you'd like. So please feel free to come in with whatever questions you have. I don't think you have to do anything other at this point than just turn on your microphone and start your question. If you'd like, perhaps you could use the reaction thing to put up your hand to let us know that you want to ask a question. But who would like to start with a question of some kind? Okay, Judy Irvin, who's an anthropology professor here at Michigan.
Hi, and thank you, Derek, and thanks to all of you for first for the exhibit itself, of course, and now for telling us about it. This is not a deep question, but I just wondered whether there were any exhibits of a remotely similar kind that served you as, in some sense, a positive model, or only negative cautionary tales for exhibits about, how to exhibit the history of a nation.
Who would like to take that one? Nelson or Amon, you all spend a lot more time in museums than any of us do. Are there national history galleries that you're kind of looking at?
Or maybe
Wait,
Derek,
I wouldn't like to.
Maybe we collect other questions. We get maybe a basket of 5 so that we can come back.
I think
Okay.
so.
Okay, fine. Yeah. Okay, so other questions that follow on from Judy's? Well, while you're formulating your question, Nelson, why don't you go ahead and answer the question that Judy put? What other national history galleries or national history displays seem to offer an orientation perhaps for the Uganda Museum, do you think?
As I explained, the structure of the museum was designed in a way from its colonial construction. It was basically meant for tribal representation. That was until 1961, when it was called Tribal Hall, and a little bit of changes came in, and they renamed the gallery to be Ethnographic Gallery. So, and it was refreshed around 1961. So it looked a little bit new by the time the colonialists left, and they put some few developments during their time. That was the history they presented to us. And everything, I think most of the materials from colonial periods were shipped away. And then when it came to Uganda's contemporary history, which were mainly spoken through oral, and so the museum thought that history was in the public, and it was not needed in the gallery, and so the gallery space had not been considered. There's no specific gallery for history at the Uganda National Museum. The only defined galleries there are ethnography, natural history, and then music, and science and industry. So we have been trying to craft the histories through temporarily. You put for short time and you remove. And for us, we bring people to talk over it, and then we go out. I think that was giving us an engagement to see how we're going to frame a history. What kind of history we're going to, it may not be a national history. Maybe we will just say history of the people of Uganda, so that we don't have, there are many nations in Uganda. What we have is a state, which that's the British colonial government gave to us. We were denied of United Nations. We had divided nations. By the time we got independence, the various tribes were already divided. And by the time you give independence to those divided people, so along all that period, from colonial period to date, we move through violence. So the only history we can present is violence. We don't have a celebratory history. I think that is something traumatic which we experience and which we grapple with. When you try to put a history of Uganda, you are triggered to present in a memory of violence. So I think that is what I look at. And these traumas are still existing. How do you go about with it, and how do you engage healing the society that has been divided and is going through trauma? I think that is the ongoing work which we need to struggle with it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been to the Kenya National Museum relatively recently, redesigned its public galleries to try to get away from ethnographic frameworks. I don't know if David or Pamela or Edgar have been in Nairobi recently. It's a very interesting and kind of partial separation from the ethnographic tradition. The Kenya exhibition starts with a hall that looks very much like the tribal hall that Nelson was talking about, where there are people pictured in ethnographic attire. And then you move forward, there's the man-eaters of Tsavo, that is the lions that ate the Indian laborers on the railroad. They've actually got the lions themselves stuffed, poised next to a railroad track, and the locomotives there. And then you go through, and it's Mau Mau is next, I think. And then development in the 1980s. This was the Kenyan redesign was a long and expensive process that involved lots of academics and lots of money from the EU. And I don't know if anyone else has been to that exhibition, but it strikes me as not being entirely successful. It certainly doesn't do the work of representing Kenyan experience broadly. And it does also kind of work with the celebratory narrative about Mau Mau in a way that I, as a historian, find problematic, but I don't know. Any other responses to Judy's question? National history galleries that the Uganda Museum ought to look to or has looked to?
Can I just say, I think the only country where you can feel a history, if you go to Dar es Salaam National Museum, they have presented the national history very clear and very well. The one of Kenya, by the time they wanted to put history, they were instructed of forgetting about the history to move forward by Mwai Kibaki.
Yeah.
So I think that time, around 2005, Mwai Kibaki was the president. I think, yeah, they were told, I think it is good to just move forward and forget about the histories of our past. And so they tried to create something, but it was, it is something which with our colleagues who have engaged with Kenyans, why they failed to put the complete history of Kenya. So they were saying, they were told to forget about the history, let them concentrate. The foundation of that museum was natural history.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was being a directive to them. So, but yeah, so we need to put something contemporary involving even the artist who can show the social life, who can show a history, maybe through visual aesthetics, inclusive, performative, all that can be interesting, maybe in future. Definitely we're going to have a history gallery. That's one of the things we are looking towards.
I mean, one possible direction this exhibition that we've just put on might have taken would have been to involve artists in representing the events of October 1962. We didn't, as Amon says, we didn't have time to to do that, but I did at one point, I think, have a conversation with you, Nelson, about involving artists in this project. Too short
we tried
notice.
to involve an architect, and I think he's here on the call. Right. Mark Olwen is here on the call, and we failed to get him on the 6th, but we got his father to come.
That's right.
I don't know whether Mark is on the call, and I'm sure Mark should be having a question here. Mark, can you unmute yourself?
That would be, I think he's probably faculty of built environment, which is
exactly.
Yes, I've just unmuted him, or at least he can unmute himself if he wants. So other questions that you all would like to put to ourselves, or Mac, do you want to come in? Dr. McElwainey from the Faculty of Architecture.
Yeah. Hi, Derek. Hi, David. Sorry, it takes a while to unmute yourself in these places. No, I'm actually currently in Lincoln, so it's not as late as it is in Uganda. But yeah, David's right. It's one of those things I've always wanted to do, is actually explore the built environment side of colonial and post-colonial settings. And right now I've actually just written an abstract that does try and explore this on one particular project in Uganda. So we'll see how that one goes. Because one of the things we tend to forget is that built environments are a legacy of whatever we do on the ground. And whether we like it or not, they'll be there for hundreds of years. And it actually just occurred to me that Uganda has actually been independent now longer than it was colonized. So this could be an interesting exploration on its own. What do you do when the time period you've been independent flips over and it becomes now the dominant narrative, or should be the dominant narrative, but it still is. We still reference colonialism more than we do independence. So in my engagement, I think that's this sort of stuff we're looking at in the built environment. And coincidentally, part of that exhibition, the first part of an exhibition we're trying to do was on show in Lagos last week. Unfortunately, I couldn't attend. And that's looking at sort of post-colonial architecture and what it means for the new generation of students of architecture. So there is a lot that can be unpacked. It's a shame that I couldn't be there for this current one, because I think experiences are something that built environment professionals probably don't engage with enough about what it means and what does it even mean to be Ugandan. As was rightly pointed out, it tends to be reduced to ethnographic genres rather than what Milton Obote tried to do, which was actually change it to something else, and that sort of didn't work out very well. But yeah, thanks very much for this. It was good actually seeing what eventually came out of all this, although in photos. Hopefully when I get back in December, January, I'll have a closer look and see what is there.
You're most welcome, Dr. Oweni. Yeah. Other comments or questions? Nora, are you coming on?
Yes. Hi, thank you for gathering this talk. It's been very interesting to listen to, and particularly I appreciate the challenge that you all faced in condensing all that information into, a cohesive gallery. I wanted to ask a question kind of off of what Nelson Abiti has referenced on audience making and access to museums. I know he talked about, the everyday Ugandan and how they may or may not have access to the museum or don't think to go to the museum. And I wonder if we can also add to that conversation rural populations, right? And their conceptualization of what history, how they can be a part of those kind of history conversations, or what the reconstruction process could look like with them in it. So kind of a broad but open-ended question.
Very interesting.
Who would like to take that?
Well, yes, I'm quick to say, thanks so much, Nora, for that question. There is something particularly bourgeois about museums and exhibition in them, how they come by. There is a presumption that one has got to reach some kind of level of economic luxuries to start contemplating subject of representation and on, and yet paradoxically, the kind of things which are on the show there are particularly about people whose levels of just largesse of life or ways of life and ways of being and of existing have not really reached that bourgeoisie. And so I think that has really not left us, and we saw it very difficult. We are presenting the history of the margins. Actually, that was our intention as we started. We wanted to decenter Kampala as a platform of high politics in the 60s, decentering in many ways also elitist politics, so that we have a kind of an exhibition from the margins, an exhibition that give pride of place to those foreclosures, defeats, abandoned silences, even mute voices that could not make their way at the times. And in doing so, we thought that we will definitely privilege the constituencies that the margins represent. But again, the venue itself in which that kind of representation had to take place, it's a venue that unfortunately for all reasons, sociological and political, and I'll also say historical, do not resonate. Those constituencies don't resonate with that venue, because the constituencies of the Rwenzururu people, for example, just know that the museum is in Kitante Road, in the heart of Kampala. It's Kampala, and it's Kampala is the center. It is the state, and the state is the reason for our kind of pedestrian ways of life. It's the reason for our marginalization, exclusion, and coming there is just too much sacrifice to give them pleasure. So it's a very important question you're raising, and something I would think, how do we imagine a decolonial, de-bourgeois museum as a venue for a democratizing, decolonizing politics of representation. It's something we need to think through, and ours was just to start the baby step of can we even democratize representation of our past, that is not just those people in suits and particularly English-speaking men of the times as drivers and actors of history, but bring women, but not just high-level women, bring actors and so on.
Can I challenge you on that though, David? I want to lift up the museum in this regard. I think the Uganda Museum, at least the grounds of the Uganda Museum, are the most vividly democratic part of the whole freaking country, actually, because it is a place where Kampalans come for all kinds of crazy stuff. Pentecostal churches, weddings, the Allure Cultural Festival is happening there this weekend, marathons, exercise sessions, all kinds of stuff, flower shows. I mean, there's a bewildering, astonishing, and entirely laudatory openness to the building. It's confined, as you rightly say, to people in Kampala largely, but the possibilities for self-presentation at the museum grounds are unmatched in any other venue, including public. There are no other public spaces that are even approximately like the museum in its grounds and its ability to attract disparate audiences from week to week to week to week. It's astonishing, actually. The problem, as you rightly say, is getting people in the door of the building, because I don't know if either Nelson or Amon have a picture, but my sense is that week to week on the weekends, there are thousands of people who come there for stuff that doesn't involve going to the museum. They stay outside. I mean, we were setting up the exhibition. There was a Boda convention on the grounds of the exhibition while the museum, remember, like a Boda safety exhibition or something like that. Like it.
Exactly. And we have great, I mean, in terms of the attendance, and I would love Amon here and Nelson to educate us. Maybe let's go to the books of the attendance of the museum. We have schools who are shuttling kids, and kids were extremely bored and they look like this is holiday time. They come to the museum and have a great time about how best to be free in the afternoon. And I think beside the kids, I really don't see a particular constituency of either Kampalan or non-Kampalan dwellers taking a very serious afternoon of their time to say, I want to see what this thing is doing to our lives. I really don't know.
Can I say something? One of the things to make the public, which you think should be at the museum, is making them makers of the exhibition rather than spectators. I think that is one of the niche which we do. When we begin an exhibition, you go to them, you invite them, you share the idea, you get their views, you see how they will want the museum exhibition to be represented and their voices heard. I think that is one of the ways through which you can connect with them and they become part of the exhibition making. I think as Amon said, the exhibition was quick. We normally take time. Some of our exhibitions work take 3 years or 5 years, and it will just be very small. And sometimes we spend much of the time with that exhibition outside the museum itself. By the time it comes to the museum, the outside publics, which we thought are supposed to have been in the museum, have already known the exhibition, have consumed it, and their voices are heard in that exhibition. Amon can share something.
Amon needs to unmute.
Amon, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I think I'm unmuted. Am I okay now? Yeah.
You're fine.
Our audience is as Uganda Museum, yeah, as Derek brought it and Dr. Tshimba is yeah. When you look at as Derek was saying, like when we were setting it up, we were setting the exhibition up. There was a boda. We have a lot of events in our gardens that are bringing different shades of people. But when you look at the events, some people come actually. We've had a lot of people who have come to the museum for these events. Actually, we've had some of the biggest shows in Uganda, major festivals. But you find even a quarter of their population. Some events attract around 50,000 people. But from that crowd, you're sure even less than 5,000 people have ever entered the museum. But they know the address of the museum, even they don't know what is inside the museum. They don't mind to ask. Even when sometimes we go an extra mile with to talk to the MCs and what to let people know that the museum is open, you can go there. But I think it goes back straight to the interest. How do you attract this crowd back into the museum? And how do you engage them to attract them to know that the way they can come for a festival, a musical show, they can also come and in the museum. But sometimes we've tapped into them because sometimes we have like weddings, we have shows which start late, and the crowd is people who come early say, let me go to the museum. Actually, mostly like weekends when we have a lot of some shows in the gardens, you find half of those people, most of these quiet shows, people come into the museum because as they wait for the show to start or the wedding to start preparing, they come into the museum. But the bigger question is the way we can attract the public that's not focusing at the museum and what its content. How can we attract it into the museum, and how can we attract it into getting this information? Because it is information for us all to consume as a country, as a people. But some people they may not be interested. Others actually it may be interesting to them, but we don't attract them into the museum. So it's a discussion that they need to go an extra mile and we find the best way possible. But as also Dr. Tshimba was saying that also the cliche of the people we attract into the museum has remained almost the same. The bourgeois, the high life, the exposed kind of characters. But it doesn't stop there, because when you look at most weekends, actually Saturday and Sundays, we have more of the family visits and than the weekdays. And that shows you actually when this exhibition came in, you because of the advertising and the presence, you could see families coming to know about the history. They come with people coming with their children. Those who have come in the weekdays with a group and they feel like their children should should see this, they come over the weekend once in a while. And these are some other crowds that are coming in. So I think the whole decorum needs to be rethought of how better we can attract these people who are not looking at the museum, and those who are thinking it's expensive. Actually, sometimes when I take borders, these motorcycles, those who don't know border, they are motorcycle transport here in Uganda. So the gentleman is asking you, what happens here? What do you do at this big building? And when you tell him, he's like, oh, how expensive that place! If all these things can be there, like I can know Uganda ethnographical and what. How expensive is it? You tell him it's just 5,000 shillings or 10,000, which is just $3 or $5, and he's even surprised. He said, with only that little money, you mean I've never been here? I need to bring my family. I need to come over one time. So there is a big gap that we need to fill to let the public know, even Kampala itself, that the museum is open for everyone, and there is a benefit for whoever comes in. Thank you.
And Amon, are the trucks launched yet, or what? The trucks? The mobile. I mean, I think that's about the rural outreach is something that the museum is doing actually very well.
Yeah, actually, the trucks have come in. Sorry to break you, but the trucks have come in for outreach programs. So soon they are going to be launched into some outreach programs that we are working on. We are finalizing to see, and sometimes also to help in some mobile exhibitions. But though they may not be as spacious as some when you take like if this exhibition has to go on mobile, you'll find that the space is not good enough to showcase whatever you want to show if it has to remain in the truck. But there will be a resource for now to go there. Also, they are mostly in the rural and bring the visibility of the museum and what it's supposed to do for the public.
I think I might also add that technically, in terms of planning, Nelson, maybe for your update, we really tried very hard to be forward-looking in terms of the audience to come to see Uganda at 60. There were gains and losses of having the president launch this, and you know, one of the big, and Amon knows the difficult choice of really agreeing to the head of states to come and launch was really to lose that attendance. I mean, the entire logistics of wherever President Museveni is with his mandatory COVID tests at his own swappers and the whole security and securitization of the venue, it was just a turnoff. We lost a good chunk of different Ugandans and different constituencies, I might say. But again, we won the fact that it was given pride of place in the media, and other people said that I will go after Museveni has left the venue. But we really tried, given the times, and I think that was a very good plan.
Oh, I understand that one. Yeah. Yeah.
I've kind of heard from some of the people who have visited the museum from Uganda, and one of the things they've been saying, it's been politicized, right? And that's a major debate amongst younger people, at least say for the middle class educated young people who are saying it's so politicized, even the debates that are running through the videos and everything. But my question would be, how do you, because we talk about decolonizing the archives, but we haven't talked about how we decenter the archives from the state. I mean, because we are having all these debates, but we are also centering on mainly people who are political. It goes back to speaking about the elitist way of viewing the material. But especially in a country that is multi-ethnic. I mean, I'm thinking about so many representations, but I'm also thinking about the legacy the British have had on Uganda as a country. So, and of course, that also shapes into the debates of how we separate nation state from, you know, the public archives. And for me, it looks like, I mean, someone talked about when we talk about audience, we also need to think about, do we also have to include the oral part of that? You know, I don't know how the museum could put that in place, but it seems like, how do we move these debates from the nation? And it's not just about the narratives of the nation, because we had everyone who was, at least in the interviews, was somewhat involved with the government or politics. Could we have had, say, maybe someone who was a farmer at that time who wasn't involved in any of these things? And it's not just the nation state or the elitist way, but especially in a multi-national, you know, ethnic, I mean, a country that's composed of so many ethnic groups. I feel like that's where the problem comes from, because when we see the involvement with the Baganda, usually people would say that the Baganda are more highlighted, but we also see that that legacy happened because of the colonial era. So how do we move that from the Baganda-oriented history to history that's inclusive of everyone, while respecting, while remaining authentic to what history represents?
Those of you who have heard the museum film will recognize Jessie's voice. She was the one, she was the narrator, Amon and David, for the film. Okay. So now you know what she looks like.
Now we know. I just want to add a few cents worth. As an architect, I do like to visit museums around the world. And the last one I visited, which is probably the one that has the most impact on me, was the Museum of Human Rights in Winnipeg in Canada. It's a brand new museum. where despite its size, to properly do the museum is 1 kilometer of walking up, because that's how long the ramp is. And you eventually get to the top, and there is actually an exhibit of Uganda. If you're ever in Canada, I do encourage you to visit it. And it does exactly some of the things that Jesse's talking about. How do you bring ethnography? How do you bring narrative into it? When you got a museum, when you got stories that don't exist on paper. And the reason I say that is because we tend to forget in the context of Uganda, and that's why I put that comment in there, everything's been politicized. We tend to forget that a lot of things have been framed in a particular way and are repeated over and over again, and they become normalized, even though they're not normal. So I have run on 3 occasions studio projects on rethinking museums in Uganda. 3 separate occasions, they were not linked. And the reason I did that is I wanted to see, to explore with students what exactly a museum is in the context of a post-colonial country. Inevitably, in every single case, the same answer always came back. A museum, essentially, their definition of a museum was the Uganda Museum. Every single one of them. Now, the problem with that is the definition of the museum being the Uganda Museum is the Uganda Museum itself is based on a very archaic view of what a museum is. Okay. So that now frames absolutely everything going forward. So this is back to the politics, right? We tend to take what has been given to us at the beginning as the truth and the whole truth, and we never change it. So despite us talking with students and asking them the same question, what is a museum? The answer always came back the same. Now, for me, who has experienced different museums, I remember when I first went to the museum, I was in primary school. I have been back to the museum a number of times. I've held exhibitions in the museum because we've held our final exhibitions there because it's a fantastic space. But one thing that got to me is over 40 years, it was exactly the same. Now, if you want to encourage people to go back, you have to change. No one will come back after 20, 30 years and say exactly the same thing and say, well, I want someone else to come back. Right? So there are all these intertwined issues that cause a problem, but we're not prepared to change them along the way because, again, comes back to the same thing, the politics. So along the way, something has to give. Now, going back to my interest in museums, this idea of what is a museum for our case. I think it was 1997, I visited the brand museum that had opened in Wellington, New Zealand, the National Museum of New Zealand. It attempted to do exactly what Nelson was talking about. How do you create a new museum that is for people? And they actually did that. They thought they were going to get in the first year maybe 1 million people walking through their door. They got 1 million people in 2 weeks because it changed the narrative of what a museum is. It's a very fascinating museum. I think, again, it's a long way to get to New Zealand, but you may be able to find it online, what they actually attempted to do there. It changed, flipped the script of what museums are. They're not only archives. They are museums about a continuous history, because the history is continuous. It's not something that sits in the past. We have decided to frame history as being something that is solely in the past. And as a result, everybody says, well, yeah, it was 50 years ago, so what? And that's where it stops. So again, we need to rethink all that as well. Yeah, that's my 2 cents worth anyway.
Well, back, it was 50 years ago when Isaac Mukirane died, and his son, who is now 65 years old or 13, the current state doesn't want to talk about even the son, and we had to cut the small plaquets with that name so that we can just get the allowance to go ahead. So there we go. The kitchen of it, I mean, the whole mechanics of how, and it comes with longevity as well. This guy has been there just for 30 years, 40 years and counting, who mobilizes a good chunk of the post-independent Uganda. How do you even circumvent that in the real post-colonial representation?
Edgar, you're muted.
Sorry. I'm wondering, like, politicization can mean two things. I mean, one, it can mean that there's censorship or at least self-censorship in anticipation of something, but it can also mean something more productive, that because nobody agrees on, on what the narrative should be, that there's a lot of politics around anything that you can say, because there's a lot of debate and disagreement, which is something, if thought about in that way, it's actually something that might be more productive than or interesting maybe than here's the narrative that like 18 years ago I was in the Arusha Declaration Museum, and so my memory of it is very hazy, but my memory is that it was, it told a very coherent story about hope and promise of Ujamaa, and then decline and, a new future through photographs. And it was something very neat. Like the narrative was felt very, tied together, and it had a nice thread to it. Whereas it's hard to imagine what a full narrative arc of national history would be that would satisfy everyone or a generic public in Uganda. And in some ways that makes it actually, there's more possibilities to do things that generate discussion that could be interesting to people, because there's not a shared, you don't go in and you won't know what to expect. I don't know. I mean, they just, my colleague, mine and David's former colleague, Jimmy Spire, presented the other day about various community museums, and there was one museum where it just seemed like the curators had just collected random things and didn't have an idea about what was there. Like they just, whatever they could get. The way he presented it was just, here we have this old clock. Well, why do you have this clock? Well, people had clocks, and the way he was, I think he meant it to be that this is not the way you do museum work. They should have a coherent collection strategy. But I actually found that to be, from his description, actually sort of a very interesting, because the things they collected, people built their own stories around them without the curators saying this is what the history. And the other museums he presented, Igongo, there are readings that are, built around ethnicity or built around, it's a bit more, because of it's more coherent, it actually seems to be less, playful or inventive. And so I wonder what if to tell a national history that is sort of uses the politicization and disagreement or incoherence as something as like I don't know, it seems that there's more possibility there than if we knew what a national history would be in advance.
I'm conscious that it's 11:45 in Kampala, which means Amon, Edgar, and David, you all are up extremely late.
This is extremely exciting for bedtime time. I mean, this is the best bedtime moment, Derek. I'm sorry. I want to come back to I'm gonna be around, Derek, for a couple of minutes, not least for the exciting questions Mark and JC are bringing to the fore here. Let me just come back again to Mark, and I mean, Mark is telling us in 8 years, Uganda will be pretty much 68 years independent as it were colonized in terms of period time frames. It's a very interesting thing. So very future thinking. How do we want to think of our post-independent time as really our own? Because there is a debate on the intensity and what colonial moment is about. Is it about chronology or it is about the intensity of what's happened there? That's just one. But how do we want to do Uganda at 70, for example? I think that is Mark's unstated question. How do you want to bring a Uganda at 70 that in the ways wrestles with that lesser of a colonial time and more of an independent time, which is not a post-colonial, it's just post-independent, but not really post-colonial. For me, there are two things here to think with. One, post-colonial versus post-independence. These are not just semantics. The nuances are extremely important, the implications are huge. But two, again, depending on whether we take 1894 as the cutting moment when colonial states start, the Rubaga archives, which I'm consulting now, the Rubaga Catholic archives are telling us about 1879, when the first guys are getting baptism by these French boys, these French prelates. This is like something like 13 years before Fort Portal is declaring the damn thing as a protectorate. So whether it is 79 or 94, it's again another important displacement of a decade. But do we when are we going to speak post-colonial in our post-independence dispensation?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, the way we staged the exhibition that we've just opened, David, is to effectively make May 1966 the kind of turning point in bringing an end to a system of governance that was enshrined in 1962 in the Constitution and that carried on a colonial model in which these kingdoms possessed a great deal of financial and political autonomy. So the way we staged the show was to say that is the moment in Western Uganda and in the center when a different kind of order comes in. Whether it's post-colonial or not is another question. Yeah, but it certainly was a sea change in the way government was organized. Yeah, so Amon is now signed off, and Nelson is also late. I don't want to wear everybody out. This has been a fascinating discussion, and it suggests that we have a lot more to do. I think we have to think for Edgar and David about some events in December around the time we're going to close this exhibition. We'll talk about that in the future. By that time, Nelson will be back in Kampala too.
Okay, good.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
So
Sauda has been quiet. Sauda has been quietly listening to us as an important constituents.
Sauda is an important constituent too, but I think we should probably sign off. Let me say thank you to Dr. David Ngendo Tshimba, Dr. Taylor, Nelson, and Amon, who's just coming back on. It's been a great pleasure to work with all of you. Looking forward to whatever comes next, not least the last stages of this exhibition, which closes at the end of this year.
Thank you. Yeah.
So,
will you be able to share the recordings with us?
Yeah, I will. I'll put it on YouTube or something like that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Mark, buy your ticket for December. We're gonna put down the show by the second day of the new year. So I'll be happy to.
I'll see what I can do. I'm supposed to be going to South America next month, but I'm still waiting. Thanks, Nelson.
Nice to see you, Nelson. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. It's my passport issues are sort of getting a bit funny. I have a very full passport already, so I have to
you have a full passport
already. Yeah,
Why
this is
they
what
do.
happens when you start driving. I actually wanted to post this one of the images from Winnipeg, but maybe I'll send them to David. He can send them to you.
Okay,
great.
Or maybe Jesse will find them interesting when looking at how to engage with oral history in the museum.
I'm sure Jesse will, and she did us a wonderful job giving us a very nice Ugandan voice, at least in the film. Thank you so much, Jesse.
You did great. Jesse, your voice resonates through the hall every 15 minutes.
the biggest arc that connects together the thing. Derek tried very much, but it was like a British pate.
Exactly. Yes. Much
No,
better to have you.
actually, Derek did well.
Yeah.
But I'm also very thankful for the opportunity.
Yeah, you're like the most famous voiceless or headless, faceless person in the whole of you. Like everybody's heard your voice.
Thank you so much. And always the exhibit seemed to be great. One of my friends literally walked in with camera and I saw part of it. So
Okay.
it was kind of cool just to be there, and she posted about it, which was really great. She's involved with the Writers Association and women. So
Wow.
I think it was really amazing, so to say, because for a country, I'm one of those people who have always found the museum boring, but I've still visited a couple of times. But just learning that there are new things that are coming on board, and just learning, the new innovations. I kind of saw the new, I think I passed that to Derek as well, but I know that he already had it. But it's also good to know that change is on the way, and we will soon see something different. I think that's
We are
part
taking
of
notes.
the thing. Yeah. Mhm.
With the less boring historian are going to do something about it.
No, I mean the liveliness of the Department of History at Makerere and UMU's new investment in African studies suggests that actually there will be lots of fun things happening at the museum in the near future. Yeah.
Agrees already. And Derek, I must say also that the children of independence, beyond our selection, are growing their interest in a show in December. They really want another show to really think about what their parent did. And I think we have Sandra Ibiriga. We have Sandra
Ibinjira, yes.
Ibinjira.
Yes.
Sandra has shown interest in joining us. We have also, of course, Nalule will join us. Binaisa Nalu.
Okay.
Mark, you are a son of you are a child of independence. Having had Charles Olwenyi, I think
If you say so, I guess.
You will have to join the panel, Mark. But I think, Derek, let's think of another grandiose way to bring it to an end.
Yeah, the video
discussion.
for the panel we did on the 6th is, I put it on YouTube. I think I sent it to some of you, but
Yeah. It was amazing. It's well received, and
yeah,
I think the discussion is taking a different turn with we who are living the times now of our parents and grandparents' decisions. So it is good
Great.
that
I think we should sign off and say thank you to everybody. Thanks for coming, Mac and Jesse, Sauda, and Nora. And thanks again to Amon and Edgar and David.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Bye.
Take care.
For the
Bye.
work.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Bye.
Thank you.